E&G Spanish.
Hello and welcome to E&G Spanish. This is G from E&G. Today we're going to talk about how to place an accent. A big difference between Spanish and English is the accent, el acento. There's no accent in English, but in Spanish, many words require an accent. An accent indicates a stress. In order to learn when to place an accent and when not to, we need to know the stress rules first. Let's get started with rule number 1. So let's go over rule number 1. When a word ends with a vowel, and a vowel is an A, E, I, O, or U, or N or S, the stress naturally falls on the second to the last syllable. What does this mean? Let's go over this with some examples. For example, the word amable. It ends with the E, which is a vowel, which means the stress goes to the second to the last syllable. So there are 3 syllables in this word, second to the last, which was this one. That's why we pronounce it as amable, not amable or amable. The stress falls second to the last syllable. Another example will be hermano. And once again, it ends with the O, which is a vowel. And the second to the last syllable would be, again, here. That's why we say hermano. Hermano. Let's go over one more example. Abuelos. Second to the last, 1, 2. That's why we say abuelos. S is not a vowel, but take a look at the rule. Number 1. A vowel or N or S. And abuelos ends with S. Okay, rule number 2. Rule number 2. When a word ends with a consonant other than N or S, because N or S are in rule number 1, the stress naturally falls on the last syllable. The last syllable. Again, let's go over this rule with some examples. An easy example with this rule is any infinitive. An infinitive is the unconjugated form or the original form of a verb, like to study, estudiar, to practice, practicar. And in Spanish, all the infinitive form of verbs ends either with AR, ER, or IR. So, in other words, they all end with R. Therefore, if it's infinitive, we place a stress on the last syllable. Other examples other than infinitive are these 3 words. Feliz. It ends with a Z, which is a consonant, and it's not N or S. Therefore, the stress falls on the last syllable. That's why we say feliz, not feliz. Also the second one, usted, it ends with a D, which is a consonant, and it's not N or S. That's why the stress falls on the last syllable. Usted. Not usted, usted. The third one, ciudad. Ends with a D again, it's a consonant. Ciudad, ciudad. So this is rule number 2. The third rule tells you when to place an accent, and that is. The third rule tells you when to place an accent, and that is. If rule number 1 and number 2 do not apply, then an accent is required. Let's go over some examples. Let's take a look at the word simpática. It ends It ends with A, and according to rule number 1, it's a vowel, so the stress naturally falls on the second to the last syllable. So the stress will fall on the I, the English I, simpática, if there's no accent. However, in reality, we pronounce it as simpática. The accent actually falls on this A right here, which means this word does not follow rule number 1. That's when we need to place an accent mark. Simpática. Another example, corazón. It ends with an N, and imagine if there's no accent mark, where would the stress be? Second to the last, according to the rule number 1. Corazón. But in reality, we pronounce it as corazón. That's why accent mark is needed on this O. Other examples would be televisión. Without accent, the stress would be on this I, televisión. But we pronounce it as televisión, that's why we need accent mark. If you have watched the video for present progressive or direct object pronouns, you'll realize when we attach something, we need an accent mark. And here's why. Estoy comiéndolo, for example. I am eating it. We attach the lo here, and we put accent over here. And that's because without accent mark would be comiéndolo, because O is a vowel. Without accent mark, stress naturally falls on this O, second to the last. But that's not how we pronounce it. That's why an accent is needed to indicate that rule number 1 or number 2 does not apply. If you have watched the video for commands, you'll notice that in affirmative commands like this, levántate, we attach the pronoun to the command, we put accent mark over here. Because without accent mark, since E is a vowel, the stress naturally falls on this A, second to the last, levántate. But that's not how we say it. We say levántate. That's why accent mark is needed to indicate that stress goes here. There are some situations that the accent mark has nothing to do with the pronunciation. For example, all the interrogative words require an accent mark. ¿Qué? What? ¿Cuándo? When? ¿Dónde? Where? ¿Quién? Who? And it has nothing to do with the pronunciation, simply because they are interrogative words, which means they are used in questions. They need an accent mark. Same goes with exclamatory words. Que bueno, how nice. An accent is required in here, not because of pronunciation or stress, but it's because it's an exclamatory word. The last situation when an accent mark is required is sometimes accents are used to differentiate the meaning of certain one-syllable words. For example, el without accent is the, masculine singular. With an accent, it's he, it's a subject. Same with C and C. C without accent mark is if. C with an accent mark is yes. Other examples include tú, which means your, and tú, you, which is also a subject. Tú. Last example would be me. Which means my, like mi corazón. Versus mi with accent means me, which is an object. After watching this video, you can see that accent marks are really important in Spanish. It differentiates words, it places stress, and it's really important. If you have any questions, comment below, and thank you for watching.